Hello, everybody. Happy afternoon. This wonderful Thursday. We're going to be talking about the perceived economic illiteracy of the Biden administration. Maybe a little bit of debt ceiling talk. Maybe a little bit of Greta Thunberg talk. We'll see what happens on episode 314 of the Thing Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Donald Kendal. Joining me today, I've got Jim Lakely, VP of the Heartland Institute. How are you, good sir?
I'm doing just great. I know that our opening chit chat has something to do with football today, so I'm going to get excited about some scuttlebutt. I heard about my Steelers today, and that is that Aaron Rodgers, after he gets done this season in Green Bay, might become a Pittsburgh Steeler.
Chris Talgo, senior editor at the Heartland Institute. I call BS on that. What do you think?
I call BS on that too. But all I care about is the Bears, so it doesn't matter to me.
And Cameron Sholty, Director of Government Relations here at the Heartland Institute. How are you, good sir?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. Jim, you can have Aaron Rodgers as a lifelong Packers fan. The organization's more important than the man. You can have him.
All right. Well, it's
a done deal then. It's done.
It's good that you brought all this up because before we get into these topics, which I know a few of us are heated on, there's a little bit of local news I want to discuss first for a few minutes. So yesterday, news came out that the Chicago Bears are purchasing land rights in Heartland's backyard here in Arlington Heights for $197.2 million. It was rumored for a while that the Chicago Bears were eyeballing the Arlington racetrack. Well, it turns out their offer was accepted. Of course, I don't know what the timeline is. Surely it's going to be several years before the Bears are playing in Arlington Heights. But it looks like they are, in fact, leaving Soldier Field, leaving Chicago, and coming to the suburbs. So, Jim, we actually talked about this not that long ago. Before, I think we realistically thought that this was possible. Mm-hmm. So, did you think that this was actually going to happen?
Well, yeah. I mean, this is the Soldier Field is, historic as it is and how people like it on the lake and all of that. It's old. It's very old. They did a renovation, what was it, like 10, 15 years ago, and they spent like $300 million. And it's still not even nearly up to snuff with a modern NFL stadium. The gold standard for an NFL stadium for many years was Jerry Jones's complex in Arlington, Texas. That was a $2 billion facility. The new building, the new stadium in Los Angeles, is extraordinary. It's so beautiful. It looks like something from 100 years from now. It's just a beautiful facility. That was $6 billion, I believe, to build that facility. And so Chicago being one of the major cities in the United States, the Bears being one of the legacy franchises in the NFL, I think they look around the league and they think, you know what? We need to build a facility like that for our franchise as well. And I think the idea for the Arlington Heights facility, if they build it, is to have a stadium, of course, but then basically build like a small town in all that acreage and make it multi-use and charge rent and all this stuff. So, it's if you're a resident of Arlington Heights, I wonder what your taxes are going to do if something like that happens in such a relatively small jurisdiction. But another thing I note about this, and maybe Chris could talk to this as well, is that when these rumors first floated a few months ago, the stance of Chicago Mayor Lori Beetlejuice Lightfoot was pretty aggressive toward the Bears. Like, you got a lease, this piece of paper means something, and we'll just enforce this and you'll be in big trouble. Was pretty aggressive, saying you guys will always stay in Chicago and I'll make sure of it. Now that they've bought the property out here at Arlington Heights, her stance is quite a little bit more sheepish. She's like, hey, we'll try to do what's best to keep you here in Chicago. We want you here. You're the Chicago Bears. And so it's amazing what purchasing an enormous piece of property in the suburbs by the NFL team could do to the attitude of a mayor.
Back in June, when they initially put the offer, I think it was June, she tweeted out that said maybe you guys should concentrate on putting a good team on the field and being relevant past October or something like that. Cameron likes the Packers, so we'll skip him. Chris, so what? Chicago is so bad that the Bears don't even want to be there anymore? What's your take on this?
Soldier Field is the smallest stadium in the entire NFL, so it makes perfect sense that the Bears want to move into the suburbs where it's going to be better for fans, better experience. Hopefully they can build a stadium with a dome, so those of us who do not like sitting in negative 20 degrees outside, in December watching Bears games can have a much more comfortable experience. And in terms of Mayor Lightfoot, I just think that she is way in over her head here. The Bears, I think are following a trend that a lot of sports teams are doing, where they are moving to suburbs because, like I said earlier, the better fan experience, easier to park. Getting to Soldier Field was always a hassle. It's just not, it's just not a 21st century football stadium. And all I can say is I'm a resident of Lake County, and I live in Buffalo Grove, which is adjacent to Arlington Heights. So I just hope I am not going to be paying for this.
Cameron, maybe this is like speculation or anything, but do you think that like municipality politics, city politics helped drive this team out of the city, or do you not want to go there?
Oh, a few things. One, we know that Soldier Field, like the physical playing surface,
Get ready to mute him. Get ready to mute him.
the physical playing field is garbage.
Uh-huh.
The Bears hate playing on it. Opposing teams hate playing on it. I should probably point out that it is maintained by parks workers and they're unionized. Correlation is not causation, but I can't imagine the two aren't related. To Jim's point that LA looks something like it's from the future, whereas, Soldier Field looks like something from outer space.
Sure.
It looks like a UFO parked right there. But I honest to God, I'm not familiar with the circumstances of how it ended up in how they chose Arlington Heights outside of Churchill Downs was looking to sell Arlington Park, and they wanted to sell it to somebody that wasn't going to engage in gambling, which, it's always safe to bet against the Bears, of course. So that's not
okay.
Really
mute him. That's what I was
so
worried
that's
about.
not really gambling, but I don't think those bonds are probably paid off that the taxpayers are on the hook for Soldier Field's renovation, 10-ish years ago. I think there is something to be said that there are some city politics that the Bears just simply don't want to be under the thumb of a common council and a mayor that seems disinterested in governing.
So I had heard, and maybe this is not true, but I heard that a lot of like the stadium building type stuff and like levying taxes and all that happens at a county level. So if there is going to be like major subsidies for this building of a new stadium, what county is Arlington Heights in? Is it Cook?
Lake
County?
No.
It's Cook?
It's Cook County. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well,
It's Cook County.
Well, good. Well, good luck on that. Maybe we have to open another wing of GR just to deal with this because it's so in our backyard. But all right, forget about that.
Sure. I'm sure the Bears have extorted a price out of, or eventually will. I'm certain. But usually those are symbiotic relationships, and they're largely transactional. My curiosity.
No, I don't like calling it symbiotic. I think it's parasitic. I think that's the term.
Oh, there you go. There you go. And will they still be the Chicago Bears? Are they going to be the Arlington Heights Bears? Or are they going to go like Dallas Cowboys, where they're actually in, of all places, Arlington, Texas?
Yeah, right. No doubt. All right. Yeah, episode 600 when they're opening the stadium. Then we'll do the show live from Arlington Park. So that's the next time we'll do an update on this. Moving on, let's get to the economic illiteracy of the Biden administration. So there's been a handful of stories that I wanted to talk about that I kind of grouped together as the this perceived economic illiteracy of the Biden administration. So the first entry into this is the White House spokesman Jen Psaki, who had just a ridiculous comment that she made. And this actually was trending on Twitter and all that. Andy, if you want to pull up this video, it'll be the first one that we play. But before we hit play on this, maybe, Jim, you can set up the context a little bit for this clip.
Oh, I wasn't listening. Am I supposed to set up the context for this clip? Well, no. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Here we go.
Well, no, I'm just I don't exactly know what she was talking about. Was she talking about the $3.5 trillion bill in this particular press conference, or do you know of it being something about something different.
Well, to me, it all kind of melts together. I mean, Cameron's been watching this as our director of government relations very closely as well. But we'll play the clip here, but it's just the economic illiteracy of this Biden administration. I don't even know if we can call it economic illiteracy. I think they're just lying. I don't think they're actually this dumb about economics, but we're going to find out.
Well, at the very least, she's talking about the effect that raising taxes on businesses and people would have. So yeah, just go ahead and run the clip.
I want to ask you about what Republicans are pointing to in the analysis in the Joint Committee on Taxation. They say, according to, if I've read the chart correctly, more than 16% of taxpayers would see their taxes increase under the bill that's approved by the House Ways and Means Committee. Will the president sign that bill as it is coming out of that committee, or will he insist on the changes so that he will maintain his commitment that taxes won't go up on people making $400,000 a year?
I have not looked at the document or the report that you have put out. Obviously the president, or that you have referenced, I should say, that the Republicans put out. Obviously the president's commitment remains not raising taxes for anyone making less than $400,000 a year. There are some, and I'm not sure if this is the case in this report, who argue that in the past, companies have passed on these costs to consumers. I'm not sure if that's the argument being made in this report. We feel that that's unfair and absurd, and the American people would not stand for that. But I will take a closer look at this report and get you a more substantive response. Go ahead, Jack.
So
it is the economic illiteracy comment. Great.
Yeah, well, I mean,
start.
Like occasionally there's sound bites of lefties that trend on Twitter, and it's of them saying something stupid or outrageous, etc. Probably every week I see one of these clips. Oftentimes Jim sends them to me, and most weeks I ignore it. Because all too often, I don't think that they're worth talking about. I think that sometimes things are taken out of context, or maybe they're misinterpreted, or they're just simply par for the course. But this clip might highlight the sheer economic ignorance that we are all dealing with on a federal level, and that we here at the Heartland Institute have to suffer through constantly. So we're going to make you guys suffer with us and have to listen to Jen Psaki talk about it. To suggest that it is unfair and absurd that companies would increase the cost of products and services for their customers due to their taxes being increased is beyond political rhetoric. Like, we have reached pure stupidity levels, in my opinion. At the end of the day, for a business, they're looking at the bottom line. How can we best make a profit, taking all of the everything into consideration, all the different costs into consideration, whether it's the inflated prices of lumber, increased labor costs, or taxes. All of these are factored into the calculation. So to think that taxes are some magical factor that won't have any impact on prices of goods and services is just completely ludicrous. I was just blown away by her ignorance when she said that. Cameron, am I overstating things, or does this level of ignorance upset you as much as it upsets me?
Pardon me. I think this administration has engaged in such a gaslighting campaign of the American public as to be offensive at the end of the day. Right. She uses the phrase unfair and absurd, and then goes on to tell us all that the American people won't stand for it. News for Jen Psaki: the American people stand for it millions of times a day, every day. There are millions of transactions happening day in and day out where the cost to the producer is borne by the consumer. There isn't two ways about it. They need 2 + 2 to equal 5, and to convince us that 5 is the right answer, they are wrong every single time, and it defies them saying that it's unfair and absurd is trying to convince us all that gravity isn't real.
Yes. Stop the hammering, Cameron. I get it. You're upset. Sorry. Stop pounding your desk. Jim, do you think that she actually means what she said, or this was just like a word salad that she regrets saying after the press conference?
No, I don't think she regrets saying it. I think she thinks the American people, or at least enough of them, are dumb, that they don't understand even basic economics. The idea that if you increase dramatically the costs of doing business, that these businesses are not going to increase, pass those costs along to the consumer, is not shown by history. It makes common sense, and it's happened every single time. I keep going back and forth on whether they actually believe this stuff or they're just trying to, as Cameron said, just kind of gaslight us and have us not remember what reality is. And they try to create a new reality out of nothing. And so when these businesses pass along these increased costs from their higher taxes to the consumer, they will then again attack private industry. They'll say this is a flaw of capitalism. This is why government needs to be in more control because they are abusing the consumer. And what's happening? The government is abusing the consumer. The government is abusing our economy. You can't keep in putting all these costs. So the idea, again, a ludicrous promise from Joe Biden that nobody making under $400,000 a year will feel any pain from any tax increases by my administration. That was a lie. It was a lie when he said it. It's a lie to anybody who knows anything about economics. And because all these taxes will be passed along to the consumer in this huge $3.5 trillion stimulus package, which is more like $5.5 trillion in all honesty. There are all sorts of use taxes. There's a carbon tax in there. There are higher gas taxes in there. Who the hell do you think pays those things? Everybody pays those things. And so they try to tweak it by saying we're not going to raise income taxes on anybody who makes over $400,000 a year. And that's probably not going to end up true either. But this idea, they have this idea that corporations just have piles of money laying around and that the government just has to get their hands on it. And so that's not actually the way the economy works. That's not the way life works. That's not how you run a business. That's not how these things work. You will pay these increased taxes when they raise the corporate income tax, when they put all of these fees and stuff on smaller businesses. It's all going to be passed down to you. And you add on top of that the inflation that's happening because of their economic policies. And this is going to be disastrous for middle class and regular Americans.
Chris, I know that you watch, again, you're the mainstream media correspondent. You watch this stuff so that I don't have to. When you see this clip of her saying something like this idea that it's absurd that companies would raise prices because they're being taxed more, is this just like par for the course for you? Like, it's just expected that a White House spokesman would say something like this?
Yeah, I do think it is par for the course because Joe Biden's never worked in the private sector. As far as I know, Jen Psaki, besides working at CNN, which I don't consider the private sector, has no private sector experience. And also, Donnie, I agree with Jim and Cameron, but I'm going to go in a slightly different direction. I think this is more about stakeholder capitalism versus shareholder capitalism. Because I think that, Psaki and Biden are trying to mainstream the belief that corporations should not raise prices when their taxes are raised, strictly, to make sure that their, share price remains, stable or high. They should do the quote right thing and, not raise prices. And it's a part of their warped view of capitalism. And it's not about shareholder capitalism. It's about, their capitalism 2.0, crony capitalism, stakeholder capitalism.
Ugh, yeah, it's terrible. Cameron, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, the point is here that this fantasy land that the liberal left lives in on why things cost the way they do. They think these prices are born of some fiat, some arbitrary number by the producer. The reason that Jen Psaki is a public servant can afford J. Roberts suits to the tune of $299 is because they're probably manufactured in China. The reason they're manufacturing in China is because it is cheaper with all the costs built in to do so. They want to avoid this reality. I remember the movie from the 80s, and Jim and I are probably the only ones that remember this great Rodney Dangerfield movie, Back to School.
Back to School, yeah, baby.
There.
The triple Indy.
Rodney Dangerfield, an accomplished businessman, is in his economics class, and the economics professor is trying to explain how things have cost, and they're going to start this imaginary business. And Rodney Dangerfield talks about having to grease the skids of the local alderman and trash pickup, and the professor asks the class, so our next decision is where to build our facility. And Rodney Dangerfield from the classroom blurts out, how about Fantasyland?
Yeah, well, the analogy here, I mean, you don't have to have an economics degree to understand something very basic. A lot of people listening to this podcast obviously have visited many different places in the United States. For instance, New York City or San Francisco, where taxes and the cost of living is very high. It costs more to say you're going to buy a bottle of whiskey. It'll cost you more to buy a bottle of whiskey in New York City than it would say in Pittsburgh. And the reason for that is not because it costs more. That the whiskey necessarily costs more, because those are the wholesale costs and the production costs and all that stuff are the same. It's the same bottle of whiskey. It costs more in New York City because it's more expensive to live in New York City because the tax rates in New York City are so high.
That's absurd and unfair.
Right?
We should get Psaki on this. If she finds out about this,
right?
Oh my gosh.
Right.
She's going to go crazy.
So that is something everybody can understand. And so if you apply this across the entire economy, everything is going to be more expensive this way. Right. It's going to be everybody buying a bottle of whiskey in New York City instead of Tennessee.
Yeah. Well, the lunacy doesn't stop with Psaki. And a new and bizarre tactic to sell this $3.5 trillion proposal, Biden has been claiming that it essentially costs nothing, zero, zilch, nada. So we have a clip of Biden talking about this sweet deal that we're all going to be getting as long as we just pass this thing. Here, go ahead. Click it.
We talk about price tags. It is zero price tag on the debt. We're going to pay for everything we spend. So they say it's not, people understandably, well, it started off at 6 trillion. Now it's 3.5 trillion. Now is it going to be 2.9? It's going to be zero, because in that plan that I put forward, and I said from the outset, I said, I'm running to change the dynamic of how the economy grows. I'm tired of
he wants to change it from going up to going down. Go ahead and hit stop on that. Let's put just a moment of we should just commend the job of the sign language person on the side, who's got the hardest job in the universe trying to interpret Joe Biden, but he did a pretty good job there. And to his credit, in this video, he does say that it would add zero to the debt. Now, of course, this is an insane suggestion that we'll get into in a little bit. But he went a little bit further on Twitter, where he tweeted, quote, "My Build Back Better agenda costs $0, period. Instead of wasting money on tax breaks, loopholes, and tax evasion for big corporations and the wealthy, we can make a once-in-a-generation investment in working America. And it adds $0 to the national debt." Well, of course it would if it costs zero. It's redundant. So on CNN, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, I don't know how to pronounce that, said that, quote, "This is a $0 bill because it's all going to be paid for with taxes on the wealthiest corporations and the wealthiest individuals." And I found a couple of clips of Nancy Pelosi also talking about how the real cost of this bill is zero. Like, I've never seen this tactic before. Now, of course, some people on the podcast here have been paying attention to policy stuff a lot longer than me. But this idea that a $3.5 trillion bill actually costs zero is a new one. I have not seen this. This is new to me. Leave it to the government to talk about the cost of a bill this way. I mean, could you imagine going home to your spouse and being like, "Oh yeah, I got this new PlayStation 5. And no, don't worry. It didn't cost $1,000. It was zero because I paid for it with our paycheck." It's just you would be kicked. You'd be living in the doghouse, literally, if you tried to pull that stuff on your spouse. It's ridiculous.
Well, I mean, maybe the issue is going home to your spouse and telling her you bought a gaming system. You've got two big problems: cost and the purchase in and of itself, Donnie.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Joe Biden said himself, it's going to cost zero because we pay for everything we spend.
Yeah, right.
That's not, if you spend money, it's not zero. Although I love the phrase $0 bill. And I think we should put Barack Obama on it. The O and the zero will just go along great.
Oh, nice. Very nice. I mean, Cameron, I said this seems to be like a new tactic. Have you seen this before? Have politicians tried to claim that they're big, expensive bills? This is the biggest bill ever, right? This is the single largest spending bill in history. Is that correct? And they're trying to claim that it costs zero. This has got to be new.
I'm going to do my best to not go on a Jim-like rant on this. And again, we've got the gaslighting. I have never seen this level and this type of gaslighting, saying something that just isn't real. It's just not real. This bill, most Democrats have traditionally tried to downplay the cost in saying that we get benefits X, Y, and Z by spending whatever amount we're going to spend. And now they're saying that the cost is zero. That's the tax increases are not necessary. They are prima facie evidence that your cost is not zero. If you have to raise taxes to do something, there is a cost. If I pay my mortgage for $1,200 a month and I make $1,200 a month, the mortgage is still $1,200 a month. It is not $0.
Like Chris, do you think people fall for this? Like when your average Biden supporter, like a Biden supporter, listens to this, they hear this on CNN or something like that. Do you think that they buy it enough to parrot it to friends and family?
I think a pretty solid percentage of the American people do buy this, because I think a pretty solid percentage of the American people have a very, very narrow understanding of economics. I remember when I was teaching economics to high school students not that long ago, it blew my mind how much even high school students just did not understand fundamental economics. And I agree with Cameron and Jim here. I mean, my head exploded when I first heard that, because it's just it just defies all logic and all reason. And Donnie, I think we might get into this later, but I wrote an op-ed about this yesterday, and Joe Biden is just lying through his teeth. The Committee for a Federal Responsible Budget, who is not a right-leaning organization by any means, they did a statistical analysis and came up with this will add $2.9 trillion to the national debt over the next 10 years. And I don't want to go into extreme detail here, get too much into the weeds, but the way that they set this bill up, they are supposedly sunsetting some of the most expensive provisions in 2025, 2027, 2028.
Oh, sure.
But anybody with half a brain knows that any entitlement program, once it's created, it never is eliminated. So what they're doing is they're doing a lot of accounting gimmicks. They're playing with the numbers here, and also taking a page out of the Obama playbook. When Obamacare passed, the federal government offered states this Medicaid expansion, but it came with a hook. If the states expanded Medicaid, the federal government would cover those costs for a short period of time. After that, the states would be on the tab for the rest of that. They're doing the exact same thing here, and they're doing it in the free community college program. They're doing it in the so-called free pre-K program and the free childcare program. What they're doing is they're incentivizing states, and it's a perverse incentive, if you ask me, to get on board with this. And the federal government will cover the costs, once again, for maybe 4 or 5 years. But then the federal government will pull the rug out from under the states, and the states will be on the hook for that. And it's like we've seen with Medicaid expansion, this is causing huge problems in state budgets. So this is just going to take the national debt and just transfer it on a state debts, and it's pitiful.
Yeah, I've got a piece here, and the video clips that we've been playing, and then the article that I referenced will be in the show notes. But this is from is a fee article titled "Biden Bizarrely and Falsely Claims His $3.5 trillion Spending Agenda Has a Price Tag of Zero." So in it, the author explains how it's extremely unlikely that this is, quote, paid for. And he says that programs will undoubtedly be more expensive than advertised. Chris actually explained that better than I can briefly do it. And then the projected additional tax revenue will likely be much lower than expected. So yeah, that analysis that showed that this is going to put trillions of dollars onto the national debt over the next 10 years does not shock me at all. And I think that all of us here that have spent years in public policy know this like the back of our hand, that this is something that we can expect. But again, will the public ever learn that?
Well, Donnie, just one last point on this. The CBO also scored this bill, and they did not use the dynamic scoring system. And just, real quick, I know this is kind of getting in the weeds again, but dynamic scoring means that you have to take the secondary consequences of the bill into effect. They didn't do that. So, for example, like when you raise taxes, that's going to decline economic growth over the long term. They're not taking that into effect. They're using it as if this would occur in a vacuum. The economy is not a vacuum. The economy is a humongous system with interrelated parts. And when you pass a bill, 3.5 trillion with all the tax hikes and all the crony capitalism, it's going to produce unintended consequences throughout the economy.
Well, Jim, I mean, can you blame them? This is all new for them, right? They can't expect to do dynamic analysis of this stuff. It's all new to them. I mean, you've been covering this. You covered this way back in the day, right? Covering the budget on Capitol Hill. I mean, they can't be expected to do this, right?
Well, yeah, I when I was at the Washington Times, I started off covering Capitol Hill, and then I covered the Bush White House, and this was in the mid-aughts. And my first beat on Capitol Hill was the Budget Committee. You want to drive pencils through your eyes and ears by covering the Budget Committee. It is so bloody boring. But you actually tend to learn how the government is supposed to function. At least back then, they used to actually pass budgets, and they actually used to pass appropriations bills, and we don't do that stuff anymore. Haven't for a long time. But, talking about dynamic and static scoring and all of that, I'll get to that in a sec. But, the Democrats used to always say if there was a tax cut, that was going to cost something. This is what's so again, like gaslighting about this stuff is that, a tax cut, allowing people to keep more of their money is going to cost the government something.
Right.
So that's
how do you pay for tax cuts?
Exactly. They always had that rhetoric, you have those tax cuts, but how are you going to pay for it? When in reality, as Chris just alluded to, when you cut taxes, and we saw this, it wasn't that long ago. It was during the Trump administration. When you cut taxes, you encourage economic growth, and then you collect more tax revenue. Of course, we spend it way faster than it comes in, but that tends to be the rule, and it's been proved over decades that this is the case. But then here we have the largest spending bill in the history of human civilization, and it's going to cost zero. Now, the government taking your money and spending it is going to cost zero. You keeping your money is going to cost trillions of dollars. This is the bizarro world of Washington, D.C., and which is why I'm so glad I'm not there anymore covering this stuff, because it does drive you crazy.
Yeah. Cameron, anything to add to that?
So beyond the trauma of gaslighting us, which is not to make light of legitimate trauma, now there's this cognitive dissonance that Jim alluded to, right? There's cost to the government when I have more money in my pocket, but there's no cost to me when the government has more money in its pocket.
Right.
This cognitive dissonance that they use or try to get us to somehow hold these opposing views in the way they do. And again, I go back to this gaslighting. I just can't emphasize enough as an observer of politics and sometimes participant. This level of gaslighting reminds me of in Spinal Tap when the guitarist is talking about his speakers go to 11. Right. They go, but these go to 11. They're one louder. Jen Psaki at that podium day in and day out takes the cognitive dissonance and the gaslighting to 11. It's one louder, something I've never seen.
I know, like, seriously, like I said, some of these things, it's just like, Jen Psaki said this during or whatever. I skip it. But these were just so egregious. I was like, all right, this is our episode for the day. We got to talk about these things. And it's not even limited to these schmoes. Chris, you showed me a video. It was Nancy Pelosi on Meet the Press. We don't have to play the video of this one. And she was talking about, how like when we talk about the price of this $3.5 trillion bill, we shouldn't talk about it in terms of dollars and cents. We should be talking about it in terms of values, right? That's the way that she was trying to sell it. So, Chris, you sent me the clip of this. I'm going to spare the audience the pain of having to listen to her spew garbled talking points. We're going to skip that. But this seems to be yet another case of the Dems trying to mask this overwhelming price tag of this bill.
I just think that it's, beyond the pale that Nancy Pelosi would invoke values in this instance,
Yeah.
because what she's doing is she is burdening future generations if it passes, which I don't think it will, given the civil war that's happening in the Democratic Party, literally as we speak right now. But if it were to somehow pass, that would be 3.5 trillion plus, all the trillions more that it would inevitably lead to in spending that would not be borne by Nancy Pelosi's of the world. It would be borne by future generations. Nancy Pelosi does not care about future generations. She cares about one thing: power for the Democratic Party. That's what this is about. This is about a bill that will vastly increase the power for the Democratic Party, and it will not help Americans.
Yeah, and just like, the 3.5, even by today's standards of how much money the government spends, $3.5 trillion seems like a lot. So it's like they're trying to do all of these tricks to sell it to the
As
public.
Jim said, it's not 3.5 trillion, it's 5.5 trillion.
Well,
At minimal, 5.5 trillion. Wall Street Journal, several studies have come out. 5.5 trillion over the next decade, not 3.5 trillion. They are lying.
And we just spent trillions of dollars on COVID relief. What the hell happened to all that money?
I
mean,
Still, a
I'm
lot of it
serious.
has not
What
been
happened to
allocated
it?
too.
Yeah, I mean, what happened to it? I mean, wasn't that supposed to do something? Apparently, it did nothing. We just threw that money out the window as well. This is ridiculous.
Jim, I'm glad you brought that up, because within the last couple of hours, a document was leaked where Joe Manchin, of Joe Manchin fame, obviously, right? Joe Manchin wrote a memo that Chuck Schumer had agreed to, that one of his top line demands was that all money from the CARES Act and ARP were spent before any new appropriations were made under the Build Back Better and the BIF.
And let's also remember this $5.5 trillion spending plan. I mean, literally, you can just do a random number generator and put it in front of it. That's how meaningful it is. But it also it's basically the Green New Deal. Donnie, you, me, and Justin and Isaac used to, a year and a half ago, would talk about the Green New Deal, and we would laugh and laugh. This will never happen. The people will never put up with this. This is so outrageous. We cannot just go to all electric power, and we can't mandate that people get in electric vehicles. We can't phase out the internal combustion engine and all of that stuff. That's in this bill. That kind of stuff is in this. It is so massive. It has so much stuff in it that nobody really can certainly consume it all and understand exactly what's happening. But this is the backdoor into the Green New Deal. It does not have Green New Deal in its title, but it has the Green New Deal and all of its economically ruinous and freedom grabbing aspects stuffed into this piece of garbage.
Yeah.
If there was.
Oh, he's turning into a robot. Keep going.
But if there was a cost to this, following the science, the human mind does not compute, does not understand it. It is physically incapable of processing this staggering number of 5.5 trillion.
Right.
In physics, it is accepted. In psychology, it's accepted. So to talk 3.5 versus 5.5 trillion is unfathomable. Cannot be understood physically by the human mind. These are the types of numbers we're dealing in.
There was a politician a long time ago. I heard this story. Maybe it was like Newt Gingrich or something like that. That when he had press releases put out on behalf of the party or something or Congress, I don't know, whatever, he would have the actual price tag of the bill. Instead of it saying 5.5 trillion, it would be 5, comma 5000, comma 000. It would written out the actual number, because he wanted to drive home the actual magnitude of this number instead of just the word trillion. I think back in those days it was billions, but hey, we're making progress, right? Yeah.
Another podcast I listened. Yeah, I know, right? I mean, another podcast I listened to, The Right Angle with Bill Whittle. Actually recommend our listeners go find that. It's a very good, they got great content over there at billwhittle.com. But I just listened to this the other day. So our national debt is more than $20 trillion, but this is what he had read somewhere, that $20 trillion, to physically imagine that stack $100 bills on top of each other, not long ways, just regular, like little pieces of paper, stack those on top of each other and fill up one of the towers of what used to be the World Trade Center. And then do that 17 more times. That's how much cash $20 trillion is. 17 World Trade Center towers filled with $100 bills, with every square inch of their of what they were. That and even when you put it in a way that you can kind of physically imagine, it still is meaningless. We are talking about amounts of money that are absolutely incomprehensible, which is why you go 1 trillion. 2 trillion, 3 trillion, 5 trillion. At some point, your eyes glaze over.
Exactly.
And I remember back when Obama, his first term, his first stimulus package for when there were no shovel-ready jobs and all that kind of stuff was, I think, Cameron, recall my memory, I think it was between $800 and $900 billion. And at that time, people lost their minds. It's like, that is so much money we're spending. That is 5 times more than anyone we've ever spent at one time in one bill in history. And here we are, not 10 years, about 10, 11 years later, and we're talking 6 times that amount.
Yeah,
in just this one bill, not including the trillions we've already spent.
And the modern monetary theorists like Stephanie Kelton will say that Barack Obama was essentially a fiscal conservative because of that number. A number that blew us away back in those days.
And it's not the $3.5 trillion in and of itself, right? Because now states get drunk on that money. These now plug holes in state budgets that, going back to a point we talked about just a moment ago, or we could have, is the federal dollars then trickle into the states and they swell the state budgets. That money eventually goes away, and then states are stuck with these holes that they have to fill lest they cut.
Sure. No, that's
like real cuts, not the kind of cuts that Congress talks about, with the kind of cuts where Congress is talking about, hey, instead of spending 10, we're only going to spend 5.
Yeah, right.
Well, and Donnie, aside from the cost of this, what about the social cost of the United States? What about what this would do to to people's work ethic? I think we talk a lot about the economic impact, and I think that politics is not always downstream from social issues, but in this case, it could be, because if they're going to pass a bill that's going to give out free college and basically insert a universal basic income and all sorts of like socialist, goodie bag programs, that's gonna chip away from the social fabric of the United States. It undermines limited government. It undermines personal responsibility. It undermines our independent spirit. And I think over the long term, that's where the real damage is going to be done.
Well, yeah, and that is a good kind of lead into the other topic that I want to talk about in the same little umbrella here, which is the debt ceiling. The infamous debt ceiling has been getting a little bit of attention lately, having people ask the questions, are we going to crash into the debt ceiling? Are we going to default? Are the politicians going to raise the debt ceiling in time? Who shot JR? That type of thing, right? So, spoiler alert, they are going to raise the debt ceiling. We won't default. And Kristen shot JR. So, you can put that one to bed. So,
the one-armed man.
in a piece from the Cato Institute, again, everything that I have linked in the show notes, Cato's David Boaz outlines this inevitability. Better yet, he shows us how frequent of an occurrence this is with a fancy interactive chart. So scroll down a little bit there, Andy. So in the time that the In the Tank podcast has been in existence, the debt ceiling has been raised like 3 or 4 times. So, Chris, is there any reason to believe that this time will be any different?
No, I think, in the end, they will come together. They will get it done, because Congress's number one favorite thing in the world is spending money.
Jinx, nice. Jim, back when you were in college, the debt ceiling was what, like $45?
I was not in college during the Harding administration. So no, I think it was a little bit more than that. Look it up on that chart, Andy. I graduated in 1992, so you can see what the debt ceiling was raised to then in 1992. What's that say? 4 trillion? Is that it?
4 trillion, man.
Back in the good old days.
Yeah, we could have one spending bill that takes care of that. Is there any point of even having a debt ceiling? Like at this point, when you see the little, on this chart, if you're watching live, if you're following us on Thursdays live, watching us on YouTube or Facebook, you can see this little black chart that shows, or this line that shows every step up is a raise of the debt ceiling. And it seems like it happens every 1 or 2 years, maybe 3 years if there's a good stretch.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just, I don't know, Cameron, is there a point? Is there a point to having a debt ceiling? Is this just like a charade that we play every couple of years and pretend like there's a crisis going to happen, or what? Do you think there's any value to this?
It is a charade. David Boaz hit the nail on the head. It is a kabuki dance. It is simply posturing. We're going to do it. We have to do it. We can lament that it has to happen, but that's like lamenting that the sun's going to rise in the east and that Wisconsin is the greatest state in the union.
Oh, geez.
These are just forces of nature. They have to happen. But going back, where I cannot say this enough with the gaslighting.
It's the theme of the show. It's the theme of today's episode.
If these bills cost $0, there is no need to raise the debt ceiling. One is proof of the other.
That is a great point. Like, the fact that we're talking about both of these things in one episode should just tell you how ludicrous the situation that we're in is.
Right. If the cost is $0, if I go out and buy new clothes today, but they don't cost me anything, then I don't really need to worry about what my credit limit is, right, or what's in my bank account, right? Because they didn't cost me anything.
Very good point.
Cash.
Very good point.
You know, Donnie, when you look at that chart, what I find most disturbing is the exponential nature of that growth. And if you go back to, like, the federal debt, way back to like 1789, beginning of the country, it remained basically constant for the first almost, like 180 years. And then it started to rise pretty rapidly. And now it's rising super rapidly. And I'm worried about 10, 20, 30, 40 years. We know Medicare is bankrupt. We know Medicaid's bankrupt. We know Social Security is bankrupt. How are they going to pay for all this stuff?
Andy, pull up that chart again. There was a question that I just saw that says, like this problem seems to be getting worse. It's never going to get better. What's the plan? If you scroll down, there's another chart that's just a black line, and it shows the federal debt in terms of GDP, or percentage of GDP. So if you just look at the nominal price of this, it does always go up. I think that maybe there was 1 year in our country's history where the actual nominal price of the debt, the national debt, went down. But if you look at it in terms of the GDP, as percentage of the GDP, you see that it has gone down over time in certain periods of time, not so much recently. And
that's what matters, because if your economy is growing, by leaps and bounds, but your debt is increasing by a very small amount, that's fine.
Exactly.
But if your debt's increasing wildly and your economic growth is very stagnant, which is the case and has been the case, for the past couple decades, that's a recipe for disaster.
Right. And that's kind of like the latest administration, right? The Trump administration, that was kind of the concept. As long as we continue to grow at like a 4% clip and our national debt, stays growing terribly, like our growth of the GDP will outperform it. And that curve, that line of that chart would actually start going down over time. Now, of course,
Reagan years.
Yeah, right. And now, of course, COVID and all of that happened. That really prevented that from, taking hold. But I will actually answer my own question and say that I think there is value to having a debt ceiling, because at least we have a semi-regular reminder that we are living well beyond our means, in terms of government spending and all of that. So at least every year or so, we have this big flashing reminder in the headlines that, like, the debt ceiling is going to be breached again. We must be doing something wrong. So if that's the only value that comes from it, I'll take it. I'll take that as a win. Gentlemen, any last comments on this before I get to my Greta Thunberg rant?
Sure. Since this is the third Obama term, I'm looking, and the holidays are coming up, I'm looking forward to Pajama Boy making a comeback. Drinking hot cocoa, cozy in my onesie, and talking about how spending $5 trillion actually costs $0.
That's right.
Waiting for that meme.
And in a couple of decades, the interest payments on the debt alone are going to be one of our largest spending areas for the entire government. So
well, that's a whole other thing.
I'm worried where this is going.
Talk about interest rates and the cost of financing the debt and all of that. That's probably the topic of another episode of In the Tank. But I do want to briefly talk about one of our favorite environmental alarmists, which is Greta Thunberg. So this is another one of those videos. This could be another theme of this episode, video sound clips from Twitter that I want to play. So we've got a clip of Greta that it's called her blah 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 speech. So let's just play the clip. Let's play this. This is real. This is real, by the way.
There is no planet B. There is no planet blah, 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 blah. This is not about some expensive, politically correct green act of bunny hugging or blah, blah, blah. Build back better, blah, blah, blah. Green economy, blah, blah, blah. Net zero by 2050, blah, blah, blah. Net zero, blah, blah, blah. Climate neutral, blah, blah, blah. This is all we hear from our so-called leaders. Words that sound great, but so far has led to no action.
She says while giving a speech.
Our hopes and dreams drown in their empty words and promises. Of course, we need constructive dialogue, but they've now had 30 years of blah, 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 and where has that led us? What do we want? When do we want it? Now. What do we want? When do we want it? Now.
All right, we'll go ahead and stop it there. So the reason this struck a nerve with me is twofold. One, it seems hypocritical. What do we want? Climate justice. Okay, well, what is climate justice? And as soon as she starts talking, I'm going to cut her off by saying, oh, blah, 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 blah. Just talk, right? Just talk. But, it turns out that your rhetoric has to have substance behind it. Wow, that's going to be a shock for you. But the other thing is that most countries have this thing called representative government. I don't know. Maybe she's heard of it. So this means that the government generally does what the public wants them to do. And I say generally, obviously, take that with a grain of salt. So in order to get the public behind a plan, you have to blah, 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 blah. They have to be convinced to do it. And
Right.
Skipping that part is called a dictatorship. That's the big problem here. And this isn't the first time that Greta has used this rhetoric. If it was the first time, I probably wouldn't be talking about this. But it's not the first time. Obviously, there's the "How dare you" speech that she made at Davos, which I actually liked. And she chastised the leaders there. In the same speech, I'm pretty sure, she said that she wanted people to panic because, you're very likely to make good decisions when you're panicking. So that's a good thing to try to get people to do. Back in 2019, Greta said, we will make sure that we put world leaders against the wall and that they will have to do their job to protect our futures. And I'll give her a pass on this one. I don't think she actually meant firing squads or anything like that.
Sure?
I think it was a little bit of a language barrier or something. I'll take her excuse for that one. And lastly, and I'm sure there's more examples of this, but she'll often accuse world leaders of letting something happen and not being held accountable for the things that they let happen. And it's like, it's kind of like phrased in the same way that like the climate alarmists will talk about like wanting to put oil executives in jail or something because of their climate crimes. Mm-hmm. So with all of this in mind, I asked the question, is Greta a proto-dictator? Cameron, you seemed interested in this rhetorical question yesterday when I brought it up to you.
She absolutely is. She absolutely is. And, to plug Heartland GR here real quick, we spent the last 18 months encouraging state legislators to push back on their governors who had become something of, dictators. They are just governors and not gods. And Greta, this message of, democracy seems to be lost on this poor young girl who
she skipped all of her civics classes,
right? Like somehow that we can scold ourselves into a cleaner environment is not how the process goes. It's not how it works. Well, I mean, she may find it inefficient, but that's her problem and not democracy's problem.
Yeah.
How dare you?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Greta. I'm sorry. But Jim, I mean, seriously, though, it's like, government was designed to be slow, like that's actually a good thing, right? The gridlock of Congress or something has probably saved us from even a worse future than the one that we're living through now. This doesn't play with the rhetoric that like we are years away from climate apocalypse. So, I don't know. Like, it seems like we're rushing towards a situation where the Gretas of the world and the Extinction Rebellion people of the world are going to seem more sane in a world where we're quickly approaching the edge of the cliff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a couple of things. First of all, Greta Thunberg is now 18 years old. She's a woman. She's no longer a girl. And so, but she'll of course market herself as a girl, and our corrupt media will keep calling her the young girl who's trying to save the earth. She's 18. She's an adult. And for better or for worse, she still looks like she's 12 years old. Secondly, you have to watch this video to believe it. She's got crazy eyes, man. I really crazy eyes. It's actually kind of scary to watch her talk, knowing that so many global leaders apparently take what she says seriously. And the idea, as you said, Donnie, that we just have to impose these things. You guys are not doing anything. Well, that's because the people in these countries don't want to live in a eco tyranny. That's why. Right. And so far, we've been able to hold that off. I don't know how long that's going to last. Again, if this Green New Deal stuff in this stupid spending bill actually goes through, we'll be getting a lot of the way. A lot along the way that Greta would like us to go. And one last point is that, socialism, as we talk a lot on this podcast, creates poverty. Poor countries are the dirtiest countries on earth. The more wealthy you are by encouraging economic growth, the more capital, the more money you have around as a society to make sure that you clean the environment. But nobody, you can't have these kind of discussions to Greta of all people, but even at the United Nations, they don't want to hear that. They just want to use the climate agenda as an excuse to grab more power, to rule over you and tell you how to live your life. And that's what Greta is super excited about. And you can see it in her crazy eyes.
Greta needs to check her privilege.
Well, that's a very good point. But no, I've been trying to make this comparison basically since the beginning of the COVID pandemic, that like, if you see all the authoritarian stuff that's being done justified by the pandemic, or they're using that as their justification for the pandemic, that stuff is going to happen tenfold under climate. If you thought that COVID was an existential threat, they've been talking about how climate change is an existential threat for a long time. So expect what you saw over the last 18 months to be, again, multiplied by 10 under the justification of climate change. So listening to Greta's speech there, it actually reminded me of a movie reference. So in Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones,
here we go.
There's a wonderfully acted scene where Anakin Skywalker, played by the very talented Hayden Christensen, and Padme, played by the great Natalie Portman, are having a date in a field with there's some waterfalls behind them. It's beautiful, right? Anakin voices his displeasure about how the democratic system of government works. Padme presses him to tell her his vision of how things should work. Anakin suggests that the dissent against the majority opinion should be made to agree by someone strong and wise. Padme says, Anakin, that's called a dictatorship, to which he replies, well, if it works. Yep. And spoiler alert for those that don't know, Anakin turns into Darth Vader. So is Greta destined to become Darth How Dare You Us? I don't know, but yes. So that's going to do it.
Donnie, I'd appreciate if you would stop ruining the ends of movies for me.
I know, right? That's Dallas and, Star Wars. But that'll do it for this episode. We are running out of time here. Thank you for joining us. If you are listening to us, you're probably listening to this on a Friday. If you want to catch the show a day early, you can watch us live on YouTube and on Facebook. You can even put your comments in there. Maybe we'll respond to it or put it up on the screen or anything like that. If you really want to help the show, the best thing that you can do is hit the like button, share this content, leave a comment, subscribe to our channel. These are the things that you could do that kind of push our show past those artificially created algorithms from Google and YouTube and all of that to prevent people from seeing our content. If you want, you can follow us on Socialist Twitter at InTheTankPod. If you want to send us your comments, suggestions, or questions to the show, feel free to email us at inthetankpodcast@gmail.com. Jim Lakely, where can the fine people find you?
You can find me at J Lakely on Socialist Twitter, at Heartland Inst on Socialist Twitter, and also go to heartland.org.
Cameron, where can the fine people find you and the work of government relations at the Heartland Institute?
Simply at Twitter, HeartlandGR.
Oh, fantastic. Very man of few words. Chris Talgo, you are a ghost on social media, so just join me in saying goodbye to the fine people.
Bye, everybody. We'll see you next week.
All right. Thank you all. We will talk to you next week.